Breaking news in the last 10 minutes, a judge ruled that 60,000 challenged votes should stand in the contested race for the state Supreme Court.
This is a major development. WIO's Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie live in downtown Raleigh with this decision as it unfolds here, Laura.
Dan, you know, earlier today, Judge William Pittman in Wake County Superior Court said he didn't rule from the bench. He said he would try to have a decision as quickly as possible. Obviously, he meant it, coming out just moments before 5 o'clock today. In his decision, Judge Pittman looked at all the different categories under which Republican candidate Jefferson Griffin was challenging votes in that still contested judicial race. His conclusion was the court concludes as a matter of law that the board's decision was not in violation of constitutional provisions. So what that means is that he is upholding the State Board of Elections' decision to dismiss Jefferson Griffin's complaint.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. That clip that came up there at the beginning just happened to roll in literally as I was getting ready to record this. That popped up, and I thought maybe it would be good news. We had discussed this issue before about North Carolina's Supreme Court elections. There was a lady that was already on the court. She was running for re-election, and a gentleman from the appellate's court division in North Carolina threw his hat in the ring and then didn't like the outcome of the results, wanted a recount, got the recount, paid for a second recount, and didn't like that, so he protested it to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court said, no, follow it through the local path that you have to go through before you come to the state Supreme Court. They went back and did that, and that's the announcement you just saw. The local appellate court for the North Carolina has refused to hear it and has thrown out his request based on no grounds because every point that he brought up, like it said in the news clip, was not sufficient to support his claim. That obviously will lead up back up to the state Supreme Court and then eventually probably will make it to the United States Supreme Court, which is the topic for today. With everything that's going on in politics these days, with the United States versus Trump now at 35-0 in regards to lawsuits, I thought it would be best to get ahead of this and start talking about the potential for what's going to happen with the Supreme Court this year. Already, there are at least three major battles that are brewing, most likely will end up in the United States Supreme Court. We talked about the 14th Amendment birthright citizenship in another podcast. I'm not going to belabor that one. But basically, the current administration seeks to have the U.S. Constitution changed by executive order, which isn't going to happen. They're going to have to take it up. Yada, yada. That's where we are on that. We've been talking about that too many times. Recently, the co-president and boyfriend of number 47, Elon Musk, has decided to close down the U.S. aid office and the trillions of dollars that it handles and has locked out everybody in there, grabbed the database, and then was recently forced to give that back in another one of the lawsuits that are being brought by the states. I think there was 3 states gathered together on that. Unfortunately, that division, which I have had conversations just as recently as this morning in some of the comments that I'm getting, is that was a wasteful and criminal organization that should have been defunded and they should take the money back. Yeah, I don't think so, because if you really understood what U.S. aid was about, it was aid to third world countries. Now, there's a reason that's really important here that we help out third world countries. One, let's start with Ebola and human rights abuses. If we don't take care of it in third world countries, it will get to us. You don't want Ebola on the shores of the United States. You've already seen what COVID did and how many hundreds of thousands of people died here needlessly. And the second factor, which you would think that number 47 would think about this, is what we don't give third world countries in aid that they haven't got, that they can't live without, they can't exist without it, they will go looking for it. And the people over in Russia and the people in China are more than happy to extend their influence and to pick up more of our allies or more of our areas where we give support like this for a reason. It keeps our borders safe and it keeps our neighbors closer to us than to China and Russia. But every time we defund one of these programs, every time we take away the waste and make it America first, it's not going to make America first. It's going to put us down about 4th or 5th when China and Russia get done using their influence, walking in like they already are in Panama. So we can't afford to give up. That U.S. aid was meant for a reason. We're a humanitarian country, and we help people around us. Okay? It makes us a stronger place in the world. The federal funding is another case. This is one of the earliest cases where he wanted to pull back the federal funding just as California was going through their wildfires. But it's not just FEMA, not just areas like that. One of the biggest Republican states, and we'll talk about that in just a second, if the federal funding hadn't been there, they probably would have had a lot more people die in their state. And we'll talk about it in just a second. But, you know, this program disrupts health services, it disrupts international aid, and it disrupts environmental initiatives. Just as an idea, Donald tried running that on his own the other day, and he had a lake up by San Francisco open up its dams. He ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to drain the lake and give the water to the farmers. He said the drought going on in Southern California could be solved by doing that, and he screamed about what Gavin Newsom hadn't done, so he did it himself. Well, here's the problem. Geographically, they're hundreds of miles apart. Geographically, the water from San Francisco cannot get to San Diego, and the water that was in those reservoirs was being saved for the San Francisco area farmers who were going to need it for their crops and for irrigation and for other things that were necessary for farming and agriculture. That water is now gone. It's been washed away before it was needed. None of it, not one drop, made it down to the Southern California for the wildfires or for anything else. So, yeah, environmental initiatives is part of it. Okay, so let's talk about the human services part of it, especially when he put out the word that he was ending that. And I just discovered this recently. It was Virginia and West Virginia, both deep red states, ended up closing down multiple clinics, health clinics down there. They didn't have the funding. They were already short. They're already a state that doesn't have much and depends on the United States for a lot of money from the government. But it shut down essential care health services, and it shut down an HIV center down there. Their funding is gone. If they get it back, if they can get the paperwork back going again, because obviously the court stopped him from doing it, but it threw a kink in there and it interrupted the plan. There are now 400,000 patients between Virginia and West Virginia that are out of care in a deep red state. Yeah, that didn't work out the way he planned it. Let's talk about the environmental and climate programs. There was I want to get this name right here. So it's called the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP. LIHEAP, I guess it's. And it's aid for millions of people across all of the states. The entire country gets money out of this program, and it's to help them manage utility bills and make it through the winter when they're behind in their bills. They can get money from the government to help pay the bills until summer when the summer comes along and they can't afford to have their power shut down during the winter. That program took care of all 50 states. And, well, there's a lot of southern states and eastern coast states. Even Mexico and Texas had snow this last week. But there's places that are in the deep south that are deep red that are not getting the aid that they need. So I'm not sure how that worked out for him and his constituents. I'm wondering how many of them don't like his current domestic policies. But let's talk about the one where I discussed it and I mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, Texas. I've got family in Texas. I've got nothing against Texas. I don't particularly care for the weather down there. But let's talk about the governor and the state have decided to disconnect from the U.S. power grid. They have been off of it for many years now. And in February 14th, 2021, they were hit with a snow and ice storm that literally took down their entire power grid. There were hundreds of thousands of people in Texas across 177 different counties that were down and down for an extended period of time because Governor Abbott did not have a plan to modernize the grid, which, by the way, is not back connected to the U.S. grid. If the U.S. wanted to give them power, they couldn't. They tried. They tried turning it on and running it in a back way a couple of ways. But that didn't end up working too well. A couple of people got maybe around the edges of the state, got some power, but they didn't. Joe Biden approved an emergency disaster declaration on February 14th through FEMA and provided shelter and generators and water and blankets for them. But basically what it was there was 3 different declarations of disaster that were given to Texas for that outage. One on the 14th, one on the 22nd. But either way, what it did was it left Texas, because of their planning or lack thereof, sitting out without power for almost a month. At the time that was going on, I was still working. I wasn't retired yet, and a friend of mine lived in Texas. And the only thing that was keeping him and his animals alive, he's a senior engineer with us, and he has a larger than normal hobby farm. It's not really a hobby farm anymore. The thing that kept him and his animals alive were a bunch of power generators that were donated to him, and the fact that they were semi-prepared because they're so isolated that even their internet service has to be taken off of a tower that's like 200 feet high in their backyard, pointed at the nearest Verizon tower, which is miles and miles away. But they had enough generators to keep their animals alive, and they had enough heat to keep them alive until the weather could turn just a little bit better. But hundreds of thousands of Texans suffered, and many of them died because of that disaster. And they had FEMA aid. $187 million was the number for that one. And without that money, I'd hazard a guess, and probably put good money on it, that more than what died would have gone. The time frame to get them back up and running would have been far longer. The SBA was also brought in. I did see a note on SBA, Small Business Administration, for those that don't know what SBA is. They came in and started handing out funds to get small businesses back up and running after the disaster. Imagine you're without power, you're in sub-freezing temperatures, and whatever perishables you had, they perished. So if that hadn't been for that funding program, the disaster would have been a whole lot worse. And I don't care whether the Texas red, blue, green, or purple, or yellow. I've got family that lives there. There's human beings that live there. There are people that I refer to as my brothers and sisters, and they need to be taken care of. You can't just let them go. Now, there's a couple of bigger cases coming out of the states also. Those were the federal cases that we were talking about that we need to get ahead of and know what's going on there. There's a couple of state cases coming up. It's in this particular one, it's in relation to Roe v. Wade out of Iowa, and it's called the Planned Parenthood versus Reynolds. Again, the Iowa Supreme Court upheld the restriction with Roe v. Wade cancellation, and now the case is going to go to U.S. Supreme Court. There was also another one on the redistricting and voting rights, which is something that if you're on the blue side of the line, you have to watch this, because this is an echoing theme that's coming out of a lot of the states. Sometimes it's called the ISL, Independent State Legislature, or sometimes it's just redistricting, or sometimes it's used by its real name called gerrymandering, where in Florida, there was a problem with the redistricting maps that were brought up by the Republican Party, and the Women's League of Voters went up against Governor DeSantis, and they lost that case in state Supreme Court. So that will be headed to the United States Supreme Court, up to see Scotus, up to see the Gang of Nine, as I call them. There's another one that's coming out of New York, which is going to be really big also. New York State Rifle Association, which is basically the defunct and reimagined NRA, versus Bruin in New York State. New York State, the state I live in, has extremely strict gun laws. Background checks for long guns, microscopic checks for handguns. I live in a state that's probably one of the extreme examples of what gun control look like, and I don't have any problem getting my guns. I don't have any problem buying ammunition. I can pick up a new gun, go in, register, show my permit, my carry concealed permit, buy my gun, and wait for the mandatory 24-hour background check to make sure I'm not a wanted criminal, that I don't have a domestic violence case against me, that I haven't been found mentally incapacitated for any reason, or wanted by an out-of-state agency, or anything like that that common sense would say, hey, you don't want to give this guy another gun, and you don't want to let him buy any more ammunition. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, a.k.a. the defunct NRA, is trying to take New York State to court for their laws that have been there since, well, I got my permit when I was 18. It's been a few years. So, I don't think they're going to win that one, but it's going to end up in the Supreme Court. basically what I'm trying to say here is that the United States Supreme Court is going to be busy, and it's going to be our job to watch what they do. On the red side, on the blue side, on the purple side. Everyone needs to watch what's going on. We need to watch to see what Clarence Thomas is doing. We need to watch to see what Sam Alito's doing. You notice I didn't call those two guys justices. I think they've disparaged the title and they've shamed the title, so they don't get it. Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. She's going to be the one to watch. If you've got money, you want to bet on the Supreme Court, bet on her, because she's going to be pivotal in this. I think she has a lot more influence over Roberts than most of us originally thought, and I think I'm going to go in that direction. I've been pretty right with what's going on with the Supreme Court, and I think I'm going to stay on this course. Obviously, you've got the 6 right-leaning, and you've got the 3 left-leaning, and I refuse to really call any of them Republican or Democrats because they're supposed to be politically neutral. Although we've seen cases where it just doesn't seem like it is. It's the best we've got. We better deal with it and learn how to work with it. So with that, folks, I think I'm going to call it a night. I just wanted to get this out there for you. I think what's coming in the Supreme Court is very important. We need to watch it. To all my subscribers, thank you. I truly do appreciate everything you've done for me. To the 173 cities around the world that are watching me, thank you. I had no idea that was going to happen. I'm just a little guy in upstate New York trying to uphold democracy and trying to get the word out. And I'm humbled by the number of non-English speaking countries that are actually watching me. Well, with that, folks, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.